Hello class. Today, to kick off our public speaking unit, we're going to learn about public speaking situations. It's important to learn about these kinds of situations because in order to be a good speaker, you first have to understand the situation that you're in. And once you have an understanding of the roadmap of this situation, then you'll know what to do and where to go with it. For public speaking situations to happen, there has to be three things. First, there has to be a speaker. This is a person who facilitates a performance or an interaction. Now, there can be multiple speakers in a public speaking situation, hence group presentations. There can also be a facilitator to the facilitator, like a hosted speech, where you have somebody who introduces the speaker and his or her speech, and then you have the actual speaker who gives the speech. Secondly, you also have audiences. In order to have a public speaking situation, you have to have people present to receive the speaker's message. And audiences can vary along three dimensions. The first is size. How big is the audience? Is it 5 people, 50, 500? All of these have different implications for logistics. Secondly, you have freedom. Captive audiences, for example, who have to be at your speech, don't have the option of leaving, versus free audiences who can walk out in the middle of their speech, if they want. Thirdly, you have involvement. Is this a topic that would naturally interest your audience? For example, if it's a speech about how to make money, or lots of money in a very short time, that's probably going to intrigue a lot of people naturally. But if it's something that's like going to bore them, like going over company policies or going over legal matters that may not interest your audience, you have to take these things into account. The third thing that you need, besides a speaker and an audience, is you need an occasion. The occasion is the purpose of the gathering for the speaker and the audience to interact. Now, on an interpersonal level, we often meet over occasions, such as dates, study buddy sessions, hangouts, and so forth. Occasions for public speaking are large in number, and this is only a small list. But for example, classroom instruction, going to a class and listening to professors speak. That's a public speaking occasion. Secondly, you have ceremonies. Different kinds, of course. You have funerals, toasts, going away speeches, wedding toasts, and so forth. Thirdly, you have theatrical entertainment. Watching stand-up comedy, going to a play, going to an opera. And also you have business occasions, sales pitches, company meetings, and so forth. Now, certain occasions certainly call for certain kinds of genres of speech writing. For example, we expect classroom instruction to be informative, but we don't mind being entertained in class at the same time. So there are typically 4 main speech genres or effects that we tend to go for. First is what I call the informative effect. So these are speeches that try to tell you about something and try to educate you about a certain topic. Secondly, you have persuasive speeches. Persuasive speeches try to convince you to do something or to believe something. Thirdly, you have speeches of entertainment. So the purpose of these speeches or of these acts is to simply entertain you. Now, of course, entertainment can be funny, it can be sad, it can be interesting, but the sole purpose is entertainment, like watching a comedy show. And lastly, you have speeches of celebration. These are speeches that are neither informative nor persuasive, and they're not solely for entertainment. For example, a toast, a victory speech. They're not informing you, and they're not really persuading you either. They're celebrating something out of ceremony. Now, these 4 genres or effects can be intermingled. For example, a speech can be entertaining and informative at the same time. In fact, we often like it when our professors tell jokes in a class. And a persuasive speech can certainly be informative. If you're doing a speech on dark chocolate, Maybe you want people to buy dark chocolate, but part of how you do that is by informing them about the benefits of it. So the occasion then is the relationship between the speaker and the audience. It's the difference between someone speaking to an audience versus someone speaking at an audience. Think of sidewalk preachers, or street musicians, or street sales vendors. Often they're yelling at people or they're speaking at people as they walk by, but no one is really paying attention to them, so they're speaking at an audience. But an occasion is a moment where you are speaking to the audience because the audience is engaged. So if you were to go to Starbucks, for example, and you were to begin speaking to everyone in the room, one of the first things that you would have to do to create a moment where everyone in the Starbucks is going to listen to you is you have to create an occasion so that the audience has a reason to listen to you. And so you might say, "Excuse me, I have an important announcement." That'll get people listening. Or, "Excuse me, there's something wrong here." Something like that. And that's how you'll try to create an occasion. Now, of course, the audience may not buy the occasion, so they may continue to go on with their regular duties or not turn around and listen to you. But the idea is you have to create that occasion to go from speaking to speaking, or speaking at to speaking to an audience. Now, what makes the occasion the key to the speaker and the audience's relationship is partially a result of socialization. So the reason the occasion is so important and the reason it works is because we've been socialized to respect such things. Now remember, socialization is the way we have been brought up through the world through our own experiences and outside sources. And just like how we've learned in conversation to let one person talk at a time and to not have two people talking at once, we've applied the same principles to occasions where someone is supposed to give a speech. Now, my argument is that then the speaker, audience, and occasion relationship works based on the same principles of how we've learned to have a conversation. So think of the occasion as what I would call an implied agreement or a social contract between the audience and the speaker. And in this contract, there are 2 points to it. The first point is that the speaker will speak to the occasion. Under this term or condition, the speaker is supposed to speak to the topic that the audience has given the floor for. If the speaker begins the talk with things unrelated, the audience will begin to wonder, and if the speaker goes on too many goes on too many tangents and undercovers the occasions, the audience might start to feel gypped. For example, consider a professor who goes on too many tangents in his or her lecture and doesn't cover the material. While we might appreciate the tangents, part of the reason we want the professor to talk to us is we want them to educate us. And so that would throw off a lot of people. Or imagine you invited a speaker to do a message on drug awareness, and the speaker didn't talk anything about drug awareness. The people who invited the speaker would be very disappointed, and they would feel a little bit gypped, if you will. The second term or condition is that the audience will support the speaker. So if I uphold my end of the bargain of the speaker in terms of speaking to the occasion or speaking to the topic that I was expected to speak on, then the other end of the bargain is that you, as the audience, will uphold or support me as a speaker. So you'll demonstrate interest and engagement with my speech. Or in other words, you're going to co-perform with me and provide feedback and participation. So it's not just going to be me up here performing, but it's also going to be the audience co-performing their listening obligations. Now, what are some of these listening obligations that the audience should perform to uphold their end of the contract? Well, there are a few. First, there's sustained eye contact. One of the things that transforms a public speaking situation is that everyone puts their eye contact towards the speaker. Hence, you see auditoriums, classrooms, all centered in terms of their seating arrangements facing the speaker. What you won't see in a public speaking situation, or you're not supposed to see in a public speaking situation, is people looking around the room, looking at each other, looking at their cell phones, etc. People are supposed to be looking at you. Secondly, note-taking. So if I'm giving a lecture and I'm going over very systematic material, part of your role as an audience performer or co-performer is to make sure that you're taking notes, because it starts to look a little strange if I'm going over very thick material and it doesn't seem like you're getting any of it because you're not writing any of it down. And of course, nobody can really remember everything they've heard in a lecture. Thirdly, following along with the slides or the book. So this could be if I'm talking about a book chapter and I want you to look at a certain chart. Part of your listening obligations as an audience would be to open your book and look at the page that I'm talking about. Or if I'm handed you a packet of slides, for you to turn the page as I go through the slides. So for listening obligations, it's all about how it looks. Fourthly, you have minimal side involvements. So in group communication, you have the main involvement, which is the main activity that the group has put its attention towards. And then you have side involvements, which are activities that are subsidiary to the main involvement and are often put to the side. Now, in public speaking situations, part of the audience's burden is to minimize side involvements. So while I'm giving a speech at a funeral about a loved one who just passed away, everyone should be listening, no one should be texting, nobody should be having side conversations. Everyone should be listening to the speaker. And if they're going to have side involvements, you have to minimize them as discreetly as possible so that I don't see them and you don't appear rude. Lastly, for listening obligations, there is also participation upon request. So if I'm giving a speech and I say, do you have any questions? Or can somebody give me an example of a time when they felt awkward? Hopefully somebody in the room will raise their hand. That's part of the listening obligations of an audience. And finally, you have silence otherwise. So public speaking situations are a time where you pretty much remain silent. And you don't typically have a lot of side conversation. And if you do want to talk to the audience, usually it requires some kind of ritual of recognition. So you have to raise your hand or you have to be recognized. Now, of course, there are hecklers, like at political rallies, and that's a case where they're trying to take over the occasion or disrupt the occasion. But in any case, you're going to have silence otherwise, and it's okay. But if I ask for participation, then of course I want participation. Now, let's draw on a principle that we've learned earlier in the semester and how it applies here, which is that as audience size increases, listening obligations decrease. And as audience size decreases, listening obligations increase. So in a public speaking situation, all you really have to do at minimum to show that you're listening is to just simply look at me, technically. But if there certainly are materials I want you to follow along, then you'll do that too. But in an interpersonal setting, there's a lot more you would have to do besides look at me. You'd have to shake your head or nod your head, say yeah, uh-huh. And we've learned this in conversation practice. But in public speaking, the audience's job to uphold their end of the contract is to support the speaker, or at least appear to support the speaker. So even if you think the speaker is really boring, you still might try to make it look like that you're listening by looking at the speaker and maybe dozing off, like in your daydreams, or maybe secretly texting, or maybe doodling on the notes. So certainly there's a way to feign your end of the bargain, but certainly when you're in a public speaking situation, you will see this either way. Now, a paradox is coming with public speaking, which is that you're often taught to stay in the moment and focus on your performance. Because if you think too much about the audience, you're not going to be on top of your game. You're not going to be able to perform because you're going to be too busy thinking about it. But at the same time, you have to watch your audience too and know what they're reacting to and what they're not reacting to, so you can adjust your performance as necessary. And as we go through this segment of public speaking, we will talk more about how to maybe resolve this paradox. So as a recap, there are 3 things that you need for a public speaking situation: a speaker, audience, and occasion. The occasion is basically a contract between the speaker and the audience that the speaker will speak to the occasion and that the audience will support, or at least appear to support, the speaker with involvement. And this contract, or this occasion, is upheld through the principles of conversation. Now, there are 3 major implications of looking at public speaking situations this way. The first implication, and I know this is a little bit controversial, public speaking is not performing. I'll say it again. Public speaking is not performing. If it feels like performing, it's because you make it that way, and that's because you're limited to a very small conception of what public speaking is. So allow me to explain. Performing is typically where you have a script and you have to stick to it. It comes from the context of theater, where you have actors who depend on each other maintaining the script. And if the actors get the script right, then the play should go smoothly. But if the script goes wrong, then the play can start to fall apart. And often, we already know the play that the actors are trying to do. So when we know when the play turns out right or when it turns out wrong. But public speaking is different. You're the only one up there. I have no idea what your script is, and you don't know what my script is. And I have no idea then if what you said was planned, unplanned, right, or wrong. So public speaking is not performing. So the second implication then is that public speaking is a conversation, an interaction. Now, it's an interaction where you're doing all or maybe most of the talking, but it rests on the principles of everyday conversation with some modifications related to the audience and the occasion. Now, under this framework, you don't necessarily have to get the audience to talk back to you, especially when logistics would prohibit such things, like a really large audience of 5,000. All you have to do is just get them and keep them engaged. So, public speaking then isn't really about being right or being wrong. It's about being effective or ineffective, whether you can get the audience to engage you or to not engage you. If you can get the audience being active, doing different kinds of techniques. So in this class, I will teach you how to be effective according to your own style. So instead of trying to make you an ideal speaker for limited circumstances, I'll try to make you a speaker with your own flavor. And this will happen in 3 steps. So the first thing we have to do is we have to clean the technicals. We have to clear the static and things that you do that may distract your audience from receiving your message. This can include speech disfluencies, movements, bad manners, and so forth. Secondly, we have to expand your arsenal. We have to give you some ideas to expand your creativity, so you don't think of public speaking as just one little thing where you're reading a paper and you're just kind of reading a speech trying to survive it. I want you to start thinking about public speaking as having a conversation with a large group of people, where maybe instead of reading a speech, you can start out with a question or with a discussion. Or maybe you'll wear a costume. Or maybe you will have a poll at the beginning, get people raising their hands, and then you'll create a conversation or a speech or a presentation off of that. And the third thing we have to do is I have to teach you some principles, some general principles to keep in mind as you adapt to every occasion in public speaking. So even though there are still technicals that you can clear, and there's a lot of ways to be creative, we have to know when and where certain things are appropriate and not appropriate. And I'll try to teach you that in this section of public speaking. The last implication, then, is that as a public speaker, you need to find ways to keep your audience. So just like how you can lose somebody in a conversation, like they get bored or they get confused or they just get uninterested or distracted, in public speaking, you have very similar tasks that you have to try to overcome. And so in this class, I'm going to teach you different ways to engage your audience and to keep them interested so that they will be interested in you and what you have to say. Because once they have the message, then they can react to it in the way that you want them to. So that's the beginning of public speaking situations.